Guys at home, really sorry I started teaching without recording. So I'm going to quickly walk through what I was doing, okay? And I think you'll be okay. So I was walking back through here and showing that if I were to ask you an equation of a line with 2 points, if I ask you for an equation of a line and I'm given 2 points, you would have to find the slope first by going y minus y over x minus x, and the minus negative cancel, and I could find the slope, and then I could take the slope and one of these points and plug them into the point slope formula, and that would be my equation of a line. And we already did that this section. You did it in Algebra 1. Hopefully you're in good shape with that. So the only difference for today will be I'm going to change the wording, okay? And I'm going to change the way I present things in a second too. So instead of asking you for the equation of a line, I'm going to say find or determine the linear function. And if I'm asking you about a linear function, we really don't want to write it as an equation because it's not in function form. So I would rather write it as f of x equals something. Now honestly, I could just subtract the 5 and change y to an f of x, and that would be a function. But most of the time we like to simplify stuff. So most of the time I would change that to like ax plus b, whatever, form. Or you could think about it as mx plus b form. It doesn't really matter. But normally I write linear functions like that. So what will be different is not only the question will be different, but I'm not going to write it as points anymore. I'm going to write it in function form. Now I really like function form, okay? And this is why. If I were to say something like y equals 7, if I say y equals 7, do you know what x value went with 7? You don't. But if I write this, this is saying y equals -5 when your x is 2. It's saying the same thing. For some reason, I give this information and people flip the points. And I'm not sure why. I think they get in their habit that, oh, that stuff right there is x, and they start thinking that the stuff on the left right there, or they get that backwards. They think if that's the x is great. But they also think this. This is written in the book all the time, and it's true. F of x is y. They're not saying x is y. They're saying that is y when I plug in x in. F of 2 is the y. Y is -5 when the x is 2. But if you just say, wait a minute, it's just like the point. Nothing's really changed, right? And then right here, I wouldn't say -6, 17. I would say what?
F of -6 is 17.
Good. F of -6 is 17. So I'm going to ask you, find the function given these two conditions of the function. And hopefully what you'll do is go, wait, that's the same thing as a point. And you can even rewrite them as a point. But make sure you understand that the -5 and the 17 are what? Y values. And the 2 and the -6 are?
X values.
X values. So your slope looks exactly the same, doesn't it? Nothing changed. Y minus y, 2 negatives cancel, x minus x, -11/4. And then once I have the slope and these 2 points, what do? Take the slope, plug it in for the slope, take one of these, remember that's the x, the 2 is the x, the -5 is the y, plug those in, or use the -6 and the 17. So that part looks the same, this part's the same. The only difference from this whole problem is the way I gave you the information or asked the question, and then in the end, what do you probably need to do? Do what? Yeah, put it in this form. So the only extra thing is if I want it in function form instead of line form, you just got to get that y by itself. So all I have to do extra is change the y. I'll tell you what, I'll just write it below. Change the y to f of x, and then just subtract the 5. Okay? So subtract the 5, and you get negative 11/4 times x, negative 11/4 times negative 2, which gives me positive 11/2, or 22/4, which reduces. And then at the end, I'm just going to tack on a negative 5, which if you found a common denominator would be what? Negative 10/2. So my final linear function would be that. Sorry. Is that making sense? So initially I would contend you really haven't learned anything new, except I'm kind of speaking a slightly different language. But the math part's the same. Are y'all tracking with me? Okay. Now, what you're going to see is questions like this. I promise you you'll have a question almost exactly like this. Determine the linear function from these two values. Now, another way of messing with you is to say, determine the linear function determine the linear function, and I give you this stuff. Well, let's think. I'm going to erase all this, but I'm going to ask you, what do you get out of this? First of all, if I tell you it's a linear function, then what must be happening between each of these points? I could make a line. There's a what? Slope. There's a slope, right? Sorry. Didn't know who was speaking. So there's going to be a slope there. Is there enough given to me to find slope?
Yes.
Why? Because I have two complete points, don't I? So what I really gave you was either a point, or you could argue that I gave you what? F of 2 was negative 5, or F of 7 was negative 2. But either way, couldn't I just think of this as 2 negative 5, 7 negative 2, and then I'm on my way just like I was before? So let's just real quickly, if I were to do this, I would say, all right, the slope is y minus a y, and look how I can cut down on errors. Y, negative 5, minus the negative 2, x 2 minus the 7, and I get 2 negatives is a positive, negative 3 over negative 5, 3/5. Jump to my function. Y, which one do you want to use? The left one or the right one?
Right.
Right? So y plus 5 equals 3/5 x minus 2. And at this point, I'm going to rewrite it as a linear function. So f of x, I'm just bringing the y down. I'm going to subtract the 5 to the other side. And then all I got to do is clean this up. 3/5 x, negative 6/5. Negative 5 common denominator would be negative 25/5. So here we go. F of x is 3/5 x minus 31/5. Now, last question. I found the linear function, but can you now find x and y here?
Yes. Yeah.
So what would I do to find x? Plug in 12 for f of x. So here we go. So to find x, I plug in 12 for the whole left side. So I would say, to figure out what x is, I'm going to go 12 equals 3/5 x minus 31/5. And what would you do to simplify that and solve? I would solve for x here. Now you can totally add 31/5. Totally fine. Fractions, man. If you're good with fractions, knock yourself out. Is there anything you could do to maybe get rid of fractions, make your mental math a little easier?
Multiply the equation.
Multiply both sides by 5. So if I did that, I would get 60 equals what?
3x minus 31.
And that might be easier to deal with initially, and then you just get your fraction at the end. So add a 31 and divide by 3. Yeah, because that's going to be an ugly fraction that doesn't even simplify. Now, how would I find the y? Same idea though, right? But this time I'm plugging 6 where? In for the x and finding the y or the f of x. Right? Because remember, f of x is y. The x part is just the x that went in. So technically, the y would be me finding f of 6. What is that? Or what is the f of x when x is 6? But check it out, I can do that, right? This time I just plug the 6 in for the x. 3/5 times 6 minus 31/5. And the math here is a little annoying, but I do find out that the y value that you got was a positive 18 minus a 31, which is what, negative 13/5? So the f of 6, or the y, was negative 13/5. So I can ask these questions a lot of different ways, but am I really doing anything different than I did in Algebra 1 or earlier in this chapter? It's all about linear functions and just recognizing the way they show up. Now, here's where I'm going to start throwing your curveball. Okay, so has anybody ever in chemistry, physical science, or whatever, come up with an equation or been asked to learn an equation of how to convert from like Fahrenheit to Celsius? Or Celsius to Fahrenheit? Anybody? Y'all taking chemistry this year? Do y'all know that there is like a conversion formula? Have you ever seen it?
Like 4 ninths or something.
It's got a ninths in there. Yeah, there's a 32 in there, depending on which way you're going. There's a 160 in there or something. I mean, depending on which way you're going and what you're doing, you can get these different looks. But who remembers it off the top of your head? You don't? Guess what? I don't either. You know why I don't? One, I'm not in chemistry doing that a lot, or maybe in physics or whatever doing that a lot. And two, I know how to find it. Because all it really is if you can find a couple of points, you had them given to you here. But if you can find a couple of points in that relationship between Fahrenheit and Celsius, and I'm betting you know them, that part I'm betting you know. If you know 2 points, you can figure anything out. So, let's see. All right? Determine the linear function here we go. Determine the linear function, or find a formula which converts Fahrenheit, I think that's how you spell it, to Celsius. Now, what is a function doing? You take an x, you put it in the function, and it converts it to what? Stay with me, come on. You take an x, you stick it in there, you do some math, and it turns it into the y. It's converting x's to y's. That's what functions do. All right? Now, if I want to go from Fahrenheit to Celsius, then I need to take a Fahrenheit temperature, plug it in, and get a Celsius temperature out. And I could write it like this, or I could say, take the function, plug the Fahrenheit temperature in, and get the Celsius. Now that's a little ugly because of the 2 F's. If that's the case, make sure you have a different letter, like a capital F or something. But it's like an f of x equals y, but it's an FC. Now, can you tell me 2 points where you know the Fahrenheit and the Celsius temperature are the same?
0 and 32.
Now, is 0 the Fahrenheit or the Celsius?
Celsius.
So it's important that you say at 32 degrees, the Celsius would be 0. Right? You with me? That would be the same thing as me saying f of 32 changes it when you plug it into this mystery function we're going to find into a 0. Is there another point? By the way, I'm not going to hold you accountable to this. On the test, I'll give you the values. So if you're like, I don't remember, don't worry, I'll give you what I need you to know. And I might even change stuff that's not true. I might, like I've given a test before where like I made up 2 temperature scales, or I made up an IQ to like a conversion that like estimated IQ to ACT score, stuff like that. So I'll be creative, but I'll give you what you need on the test. You don't have to know any pre-existing information. Is there another relationship? You know, that was freezing.
2 12s and a 110.
212 and 100 are boiling. Now, if you don't know that, again, I give it to you. So Fahrenheit, 212 degrees Fahrenheit converts to 100 degrees Celsius, and that's boiling temperature, which is the same thing as me saying F of 212 equals 100. Now, guys, if I said convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit, then you have C to F, and these would just be switched, right? So make sure you get them lined up, or you're going to get a function that's not really doing what it's supposed to do. Are y'all with me so far?
Yep.
Okay. Now, looks to me like I have 2 points. And if I have 2 points, can I find a slope?
Yep.
And if I have a slope, can I find an equation?
Mm-hmm.
And if I have an equation, do you know every relationship that's out there between Fahrenheit and Celsius? That's what they do. So let's see. What's my slope?
100 minus 0.
So, careful. Y minus y. I have more people go 212 minus 100. Like, they learn all this, and then they just freak out. Remember, Fahrenheit to Celsius. Fahrenheit to Celsius. Not Fahrenheit to Fahrenheit. And Celsius to Celsius. So, y minus y over x minus x. So I end up with 100 over what?
180.
180, which after canceling some stuff, I can divide 10 into the top and the bottom. Actually, I could divide 20 in there, but I could divide another 2, and I get, there's that 9 somebody mentioned. And once I have slope, can I get an equation of a line? Which one do you want to use?
0, 0.
I really like that one, yeah. So y minus nothing equals 5/9 x minus 32. And the great thing about that is I don't have to add anything to the other side, do I?
Nope.
So my function would be f if you used x and y, but I didn't say use x and y. I just said find an equation. I did say linear function, but to convert Fahrenheit to Celsius, if you want to use f of x and x, that's fine. But you can also say, hey, what was the y? The y was the
Celsius.
C. So if you want to do this, f of x equals 5/9 x minus 1/69. Isn't that what you get here? That's fine. That's the linear function. But if I asked you for an equation that went Fahrenheit to Celsius, make sure you remember F stands for what?
Fahrenheit.
X. Yeah, it does. Fahrenheit. Yeah, but it represents which coordinate?
X.
The x coordinate. So that would also be like doing 5/9 F. And then the function, the y value, is like the C. And you just came up with an equation that converts Fahrenheit to Celsius. Yeah. So if I said, hey, what's the Celsius temperature if the Fahrenheit was 102 degrees today? Why don't we pick something nicer? If it's 108 degrees Fahrenheit today, and I said, what Celsius temperature goes with that? I could just take 108, plug it in there, and 60, well, it's not going to be pretty. So what, 540 minus 169ths? So what's that? 380 ninths, which I would take that degrees Celsius. I'll try and make the numbers a little nicer on a test. Not too bad? Now, do you think there's an exact relationship between IQ and ACT? No. I mean, you can find two people that have the same IQ score that have different ACTs. Now, if they both had like 165 IQs, I'm betting that their test scores are close. But I've seen people with like, 120 IQ scores that are really hard workers and take a zillion practice tests, pull out a 34 on the ACT, and I've seen 120 on ACTs that go, oh man, my parents are loaded, they're paying for college, I'm going to Auburn, Alabama, whatever, and they just roll out their 30 or their 28 and they're happy with it and they're just done. So work and effort obviously come into play, but on average, do you think there might be, like, statistically, a relationship between IQ and ACT? I bet it's not a direct correlation, which is something you might talk about in stats, but I bet there's some relationship there, right? I mean, the higher IQ, probably the higher ACT, maybe. But I could give you a relationship like that. So see if you can follow with me on a question like this. I'll tell you what. Forget that. I got a better one. And I got time. Maybe I'll do both. What if I said this? All right, Biff, the plumber, charges $640 for a 6-hour job. He also charges, let me make sure I get this right, $820 for a 9-hour job. Determine how much he'd charge for a 11-hour job. I don't know if you know about this. You very well may not, unless maybe y'all are in the plumbing business in your family. First of all, you make a killing as a plumber. I mean, I do most of my plumbing work, you know, whether I'm running lines or fixing junk. But most of the time you call them up and they're like, yes, sir, I'd be happy to come out there, but it's a $90 charge, you know, $80 charge to knock on your door because I got to travel or whatever their hourly rate is, and then I'm going to charge you $90 an hour after that. You make really good money as a plumber, just saying. My plumber's a guy named Big E. He's got no hair, but a 2-foot ponytail, completely tatted up. He's rolled in on a $50,000 Harley before. I know he has a beach house in Seagrove, and he has 5 crews working for him, and he charges $90 an hour, and he just prints money. And he's the nicest guy on the planet. He's a little scary when you first meet him, when you know, if you stereotype people, but great guy. Will work his tail off. I'd recommend it. Big E's Plumbing. Problem with Big E is he's so busy now, you go to get him. He put a hot water heater in for me a couple months ago, and he's like, yeah, I might be able to get out there in 3 weeks. I mean, so it's like 3 weeks of cold showers or whatever before he puts it in because he's so busy. So definitely a career out there if you decide not to head to the math and science or college, or go to college and be a plumber. I'm telling you, you can make a killing. That and septic repair. For whatever it's worth. I started hunting down a guy to fix our septic system in May, and he still hasn't gotten out there. That's how busy they are. It's not sexy. I mean, it isn't glorious, but man, those guys just print money. Whatever. Look at this. Now, at first glance, you might go, oh, $640 for a 6-hour job. I divide 6 in there, and I get roughly $106 and change per hour, right? But then I divide a 9 in there, and I'm like, wait, it's like $90-something and change. He's charging me different hourly rates. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe he's charging the same hourly rate, but he's got a fixed charge in there. Are you with me? Now, what is a rate when it comes to linear function? It's a slope. What do you think a y-intercept is? The fixed charge. So this is a linear situation, most likely. It might be a guy that's just throwing numbers out. I mean, I had a painter once who walked in, and I said, what for that? And no matter what, he was this little old guy, been painting most of his life. He walked in there, $100. It's like, do it. You know, cheapest guy around. And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason, but whatever. So what do I know here? I think I've been given 2 points. You with me? You could go either way on this, but I think I'm like, all right, for a 6-hour job, it's going to cost me $640. I could go the other way, $640, 6-hour job. But most of the time, if I'm a plumber, I'm not just coming up with a number and saying, hey, guy, I worked 6 hours. I know I didn't get done. Sorry, but you only paid me 6. Most guys say, hey, I worked 6 hours. Here's the bill. So most people kind of think this way. Now that would be the same thing as saying, hey, there's some function out there that if I plug a 6 hours into it, it's going to spit out 640 bucks. Now the other thing says, hey, a 9-hour job would cost me $820, which is the same thing as me saying, hey, there's some function out there that if I plug in a 9, I get $820. And if I have 2 points or 2 spots on a function, what can I find? Slope. And then after I find slope, I can take the slope of the line and, right? And then once I find the function, what can I do? Figure out the charge for the 11 hours. Because 11 would get plugged in for what? For X, and you'd be finding the amount you're getting charged. Pretty simple, huh? So let's get started. What would be the slope here?
820 minus 640.
So 820 minus 640, y minus y, over 9 minus 6, and I get what? 180 over 3, which is 60 bucks. So what does it look like that is?
That is the slope.
That's my slope. That's my 60 bucks per hour this guy's charging me, which by the way is pretty cheap for a plumber. Pretty cheap. I mean, another car repair. Dude, $125 an hour at the Chevy dealership. And you go to California, $190 an hour. Because they can. And people got to get the car fixed. And nowadays you can't just fix it. I mean, you could fix brakes, stuff like that, but like diagnosing those engines and tearing them apart, it's not like I used to have a 1970 Mustang that my dad was, he could do anything. And he taught me how to tear stuff apart and fix them. But nowadays, man, nobody even owns the tools to do it. But I got a slope, right? From a slope, what do? So which one do you want to use? I tend to go with smaller numbers, right? Yeah, y minus 640 equals my slope, 60, x minus 6. Let's clean it up by adding that 640 over. And I'm going to bring that y down and say f of x is 60x minus 360 plus 640. F of x equals 60x. Is that right? I must have, if I made a careless error, 60 was right, but I thought I had a different y value in my head. Looks to like this is what?
280.
If I made an error here, I did not mean to make the knock on the door fee 280. But it is. Oh well, doesn't matter, I did it right, right? So this guy, I probably wouldn't have him come visit. Because if he walks over there and says, oh yeah, I just got to fix that line on your toilet, it's a $10 fix. I could have purchased a toilet almost for $280. Brand new, right? That's pretty steep for knocking on your door, that fixed charge. Good variable charge. So if it's a huge job that takes tons of hours, maybe it's better. But small jobs, that would be pretty brutal. So, how much would an 11-hour job cost? So there's my function. And in the 11-hour job, I just plug an 11 in. So I end up with, what, 660 plus 280. So 660 plus 280 is 940. So how much did it cost? 940 bucks, probably plus parts, but that would be his materials. I mean, that would be his time and energy. And that's how they usually bill you, time and energy and then parts. They probably double the price of parts because it takes some time to go fetch them from Home Depot or order them off Amazon or whatever. Or Lowe's. You know. Or Huffstetler's Hardware, you know, if you're in Homewood. All right? How we feeling?
Good.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave the rest of you. Tomorrow, if you guys have a question, and I really would do this, the quicker you get your homework done, when you get home in here, since you're not going to be here tomorrow for the review, if you guys would just send me questions, I'll just line up those questions. You have the review sheet too. So if you have a homework question tonight, or you flip through the review sheet and you see something that's a little ugly, then send me, say, hey, could you do this on your review in class? And I'll be happy to add those into the video. Might help you out a little bit. But I really think y'all are going to be okay if you've done the work and are just careful. All right? All right. Sayonara.